So I think you have to be morally obtuse to work for a tobacco company. And I think today for some computer companies, I think it requires moral obtuseness to work for these companies. Let's use the Star Wars metaphor. We think of ourselves still as the rebels. We don't realize now we are the empire. We are running the Black Star. We are not the rebels anymore. We are the empire. At what point do we talk to our students and says, well, yes, you can go to companies, but if you're going to work for a company, you are working for the benefit of that company. When I work in academia, yes, when I work for university, yes, I have an educational mission, but I don't feel I'm working for the president. I told the president once that he's working for me. Today you see very few Israelis in the United States coming for the PhD because they have Turing Award winners in Israel. But it used to be that the most standard thing was if you want an academic career, you have to study abroad. I skipped 2 grades. Only years later I found out that the main reason I skipped grades is because the teachers wanted to get rid of me. They said I was too much trouble in the class.
Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. This is episode 29, an interview with Moshe Vardi, professor of computer science at Rice University in Houston, and winner of 2 of the most prestigious Lifetime Achievement Awards in computer science, the Gödel Prize in 2000 and the Knuth Prize in 2021. You may also enjoy the lead episode of our ongoing segment on Israel. That's episode 27. And that episode features 3 computer scientists originally from Israel and who have been in the US since the 1980s and 1990s. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is structured into acts or chapters. You'll find chapter markers on your audio player, and you can use these to jump between the acts or chapters. I am delighted to welcome Moshe Vardi to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. Moshe is a professor of computer science at Rice University, where he has been since 1993. Moshe is highly decorated. Among his many awards are 2 of the most important prizes in computer science, the Gödel Prize in around 2000, given in theoretical computer science, and the Knuth Prize in 2021 for seminal contributions to computer science foundations. He is a fellow of multiple prestigious organizations, an ACM Fellow, an IEEE Fellow, Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, Fellow of the American Association for Artificial Intelligence, AAAI, Fellow of the American Mathematical Society, Fellow of the European Association for Theoretical Computer Science, Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a Guggenheim Fellow. He's also a member of several prestigious organizations. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He's a member of the Academia Europaea and a member of the European Academy of Sciences. He's also won many awards for his leadership and service, including the ACM Presidential Award, the Harry H. Good Memorial Award from IEEE, and the IEEE Norbert Wiener Award for Social and Professional Responsibility. He's a senior editor of the communications of the ACM after serving as its editor-in-chief for about a decade. And he's won many, many other awards, which I'm not able to list here. Here's Moshe's timeline before he became a professor at Rice. He grew up in Israel in the 1950s and 60s and a bit of the 70s. Moshe got his BSc in Physics and Computer Science, summa cum laude, in 1974 from Bar Ilan University in Israel. In 1980, he got his MSc in Computer Science from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. And then in 1981, just a year after, he got his PhD in computer science at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in Israel. After his PhD, Moshe immigrated to the US in 1981 to do a postdoctorate at Stanford University. He was at Stanford as a postdoc from 81 to 83. After that, he was a visiting scientist at IBM Research and research associate at Stanford from 83 to 85. And then after that, he spent 8 years at IBM Research at Almaden from 1985 to 1993. After that, in 1993, he became a professor at Rice University, where he also served as a department chair from 1994 to 2002. Welcome, Moshe, to the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast, and thank you for being willing to share your journey and your story with us.
My pleasure.
So you grew up in the Israel in the 1970s and 60s and a bit of the 1950s. Those were very early days in your life and also very early days in the nation of Israel itself, as the country was officially formed in the late 1940s. What do you remember about the country from your early years growing up?
I grew up in a kibbutz. A kibbutz was an experiment of socialism in the small, kind of a collective. Main focus was on agriculture and hospitality. It was a very idyllic place. It was a small, probably around maybe 50 to 60 family up on the Carmel Hills. So I have a lot of nostalgia for the place. It was, outside, once you step outside of the kibbutz boundaries, it was practically the wilderness. So it was, for me, it was a great place to grow up. I could never, I felt pity for my relatives from the city who grew up in the city. To me, it was the freedom of growing up in the country was just the way to grow up. I mean, when I went outside, my parents never asked, where are you going? I just said, I'm going to play. Okay, go play. Just be back in time for dinner. And it was just completely safe.
And there was a lot of trust. It sounds like there was a lot of trust among the families in the kibbutz that your parents would just let you go.
Oh, yeah, they would let me go. They knew that they didn't have to worry about me. It was a classical thing that nobody locked doors. So I didn't have a key to the house. Why do you need a key? The house was open. So there was this kind of growing up. So this was very, very idyllic. But at the same time, at maybe around age 12, I decided to design a board game. And I designed a board game. And the board game, it was a two-player board game. And one side was the PLO, and the other side was the PLO is a Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the other side was the IDF. And the PLO was trying to infiltrate and bomb things, and the IDF was supposed to stop them. The game did not prove to be very popular with my friends because no one ever wanted to play the PLO. But it's kind of, so the game was a bust in some sense, but to me it's kind of interesting. It tells me about the mindset of a 12-year-old boy who in this idyllic setting already worried about terrorism. So you can never get away from the security equations in Israel.
So this was a game of strategy that you designed based on, there's things you were hearing in the news or things that you were hearing people talking. And what about the schooling? So was the schooling inside the kibbutz community itself?
No, the kibbutz was too small to have its own school. It had a regional school. Now, the regional school was just next to the kibbutz. So it was really, I don't know, half a mile away. I did not have to walk very far. Some other places, the children were had a bus. We just had to walk. So the school was practically in the kibbutz, but it was really a regional school for what we call the Carmel Shores.
I see.
It was a regional council.
Tell us a little bit about the kibbutz itself. So here, like today, now in the U.S., we have these communities of houses, and sometimes, kids go over and have play dates and things like that. It seems to me that the kibbutz is a more tightly knit than that. Can you say a little bit more about how exactly the families are tightly knit inside the kibbutz?
So the kibbutz was really an attempt that ultimately, historically, and that will take an hour just to talk just about that, but it was trying to implement socialism in the small rather than in the large. So in the large means, basically it's what we call a centralized economy.
Right.
Okay. And here it's what people here would call in United States a commune. Really, it will be the equivalent of a commune, economic commune. The people in the kibbutz essentially had an economic partnership, and so they own the means of productions collectively, and so they're all essentially self-employed, so to speak. The kibbutz was a partnership. The kibbutz owned all the means of production. We had fields, we have a barn, we have cows, we have at some point sheep, everything. We will have actually a guest house, and there was someone who was the labor coordinator, and he told people, this is where we need you now. So now you need to work here, and now you need to work there. And you got paid by family size, and it was not called even a salary. Mm-hmm. It was really more like an allowance. It was called a budget. Mm-hmm. And the budget was just a function of family size. Mm-hmm. Now that kibbutz was a bit unique. At that time, in the early 50s, in the mid to late 50s and 60s, kibbutzim in Israel also, it was an idea that ultimately did not succeed. The idea was to liberate women from a lot of housework. Mm-hmm. And therefore the children grew up, again, collectively. Mm-hmm. But this kibbutz I grew up with a family. So I grew up in a family.
So your parents, did they work in the kibbutz itself?
My parents worked in the kibbutz itself, yes.
And the food that you ate, that was cooked in a communal way by several people?
The food was cooked at home.
Was cooked at home, just your home itself.
Home. So we had unlike some other things, we had basically a family. My parents, myself and my siblings, we grew up in a home. My wife, my mother was in charge of cooking. Mm. So it was all in the context of a family structure, family unit.
And did your father or your mother, did they have professions that were related to engineering or science?
Not at all. Not at all. So the kibbutz. So my mother had to do more with hospitality. The kibbutz is a guest house, and my mother worked for the guest house. My father started actually as an auto mechanic. And at some point he said no. He decided he wanted a little more, and he asked the kibbutz to send him to a teacher seminary, and he became a teacher. For my childhood, I enjoyed much more to have my father as a mechanic, because that was fun. Tractors, machines, soldering, all these things. That was kind of fun as a child. A father who was a teacher, it was actually very boring. Yeah. But for my father was an important step in his kind of intellectual development. And in fact, after about 15 years in the kibbutz, he wanted to go to college. He decided he wants to go to college. And he went to kibbutz and says, I want to go to college. I'll continue to work, full-time job, and I want to go to college. And the kibbutz says, well, you want to go to college. That's very individualistic. This is a kibbutz here. We make collective decisions. The membership will decide whether or not you should go to college. And, you want to go to college, next thing. Everybody wants to go to college. We can't manage these things that way. So the membership will decide if you're going to go to college. And to my father, that was, he didn't realize being a kibbutz, it means such a loss of autonomy that he cannot pursue his educational aspirations. Right. And at that point, he said, he basically made a decision, and my mother was not happy about it. But he was a tough man, and he said, we're leaving.
I see.
And he found a job as a teacher somewhere else, and we packed our stuff and moved.
I see. So he didn't even wait for the kibbutz to render their judgment on whether they
would. No, he did not even wait. He did not like the idea that the membership will decide whether or not he can go to college. He said, as long as I'm doing my job, he said, I want to work a full-time job and go to college. And they said, well, but the kibbutz will decide. And he didn't like this loss of autonomy.
Mm-hmm. How old were you at this time when you left?
I was 13 years old. So this was a big transitions for me.
So that transition must have been quite a bit of a shock, right? Because you grew up in a communal kibbutz and then suddenly you moved to this outside world.
Yeah, but it's more than just, it's in some sense, the child loser, you kind of develop roots. And so I kind of take the fact that I kind of move around, the fact that at age 13, I lost my original roots. And the next place where I moved, I was there for 3 years, and then I moved. So I kind of, I didn't have what some people have. They grow up all the way to age 18 in one place. I did not have it. I kind of moved, and I don't know, you call it my rootlessness. You either think of it as a plus or a minus, but I did move around, and in some sense I've been moving around. In fact, Houston is the place I've been living the longest.
Yeah.
So if people ask me, what are you? I should say I'm a Houstonian, but it doesn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You've been there for 28 years at this point, at least.
Yeah.
What was your first interest in math and science? Was it organic, or was it immediately evident to you at an early age, perhaps when you were with your father as he was a mechanic? When did you first get interested?
So my parents, I guess I had some interest. I don't remember the early days, but I tell two things. One is that I had a math teacher who had aspiration. In fact, eventually he left and got a PhD and became an academic. And he decided to start a math club. So this will be after school activity on math.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that there were not enough children that would be willing to spend their playtime doing math. So this math club lasted maybe, I don't know how many meetings, but not many more meetings. But the very, very first meeting, and I was maybe in 4th grade or something like that, and the first meeting was about matrices.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, I don't remember it directly, but my mother told me later, I came home, I was very excited, and she said, how was it? And I said, it was beautiful. And she said, do you mean interesting? I said, no. I said, beautiful, I mean beautiful. So I found beauty in linear algebra at age 10. But really, math was not my thing. I was more interested in physics.
Mm-hmm.
And again, around, I don't know exactly what age. Maybe it was for 13, maybe for my bar mitzvah. But I think my parents bought me a sequence of like 12 volumes of books, and they were called The Young Engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mostly science and engineering. And I read this book God knows how many times.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, both of my parents passed away in the last few years. And in 2019, just before the pandemic, my siblings and I decided to sell the house where they lived.
Yeah.
And so we had to clean it up.
Yeah.
And it also meant that I had to clean up lots of my childhood was there.
Right.
Things that had just emotional value.
Right.
Including these 12 volumes of the young engineers. And I was very torn to do about them. Okay, what do I do with these 12 books? Emotionally, it was meaningful, a memento of my childhood and my becoming a scientist. But it didn't make much sense to ship them all in the United States. And I knew that I'm not going to sit here and read these 12 books. It's really just nostalgia.
Right.
And eventually, actually, I was torn, and then my brother found out somebody we were living at that point. We left, and we moved from the kibbutz to something called Moshav, which is a village. Essentially, it's a village. And my brother found someone who was also interested in nostalgia. And when he heard that I have the collection of 12 volumes of The Young Engineer, he says, I want it.
Uh-huh.
So that's what we did. I gave it away to someone else who doesn't have to move, so he doesn't have to worry about the weight of nostalgia.
I see. Were there other things apart from this book set that were nostalgic in the memories that in the
There
house?
were there were lots of things like the board game. What do I do with the board game?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
actually wasn't even at this point. It was just the pieces. I didn't remember exactly even how you play the game. I never wrote a manual.
yeah, yeah.
But there was just a whole bunch of things that you just have to, a whole bunch of punch cards from my college times.
Hmm.
And again, these are some of my first programs in punch cards. What do I do with them? And the answer was throw them away, just recycle them. But
Yeah.
it's just emotionally difficult to do it. Just saying, it was a lot of saying goodbye.
When you got interested in math and science, how was your parents' reaction to your interest? Was it, yes, this is natural, this is normal, or how was it?
So I think my father was a little torn. So I come up from a family with a very long rabbinic tradition
Hmm,
of I don't know how many generations of rabbi.
I
But my
see.
father was actually at the end, part of his educational journey was he became an ordained rabbi. He never had a pulpit. He was a teacher. He taught Judaism,
Hmm.
but he was officially an ordained rabbi, and his father was, and God knows how many generations.
Yeah,
And so we actually kind of made a deal after I finished high school. We made a deal that I would go for 1 year to rabbinical seminary,
I see. Okay.
and then if I want to go to university, I can go to university. And I said, okay, that's a fair deal. And I went a year for rabbinical seminary. It didn't change anything. I was determined to go. I want to study physics.
Yeah,
Computer science came a little bit later. First, I
later.
wanted to study physics. I
Yeah,
was really into science, and physics was a hard science. So,
yeah,
in a particular, in high school where we had the last 1 year of what we call modern physics.
mm,
And there was relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And this was so absolutely fascinating. There was just no rabbinical school would be able to tear me away from my dream of studying physics.
yeah. And so your parents just bowed to your interests and your,
So that was this. Okay, he said it's fair deal. You give it a try for 1 year, then you decide. You say you're going to be at this point. I was a bit young when I finished high school. I finished high school at age 16.
mm, mm, I
So
see.
he said, okay, in a year you'll be 17. You should decide for yourself after that what you want.
Did you skip grades or what allowed you to finish early?
I skipped 2 grades. I was only years later I found out that the main reason I skipped grades is because the teachers wanted to get rid of me. They said I was too much trouble in the class.
Why were
Okay,
you trouble?
because I knew everything and I was way ahead of the other kids, and they didn't know what to do with me. So they said just kick him off to a higher grade. So from fourth grade, the fourth grade teacher said, no, 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 don't pass him. I don't want to see him again. The teacher used to move with the class.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this tradition. You have a teacher, and then the same teacher would teach you and then move on with you.
Mm,
So the teacher said, I don't want to see. I mean, I was just too much trouble for her.
mm.
So she said, no, no, pass him to sixth grade. And the sixth grade teacher said the same thing. So they passed me on to eighth grade. And after that, I went to high school, so it was different. So, but at least at 2 places, the teacher said, no, 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 I don't want to see the student again.
This is the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast interview with Moshe Vardi, Professor of Computer Science at Rice University. When you were growing up in the kibbutz and then later in the village moshav, there were quite a few conflicts in the nation of Israel, and Israel is a pretty small nation that you cannot be very far away from where the conflicts are happening in the 50s and the 60s. Did those affect your growing up as a child and your family itself?
So 1967, we had what's called the 67 war.
Yeah.
So before that, we had the issue of dealing with terrorism, with the PLO, IDF. I told you about this board game.
Yeah.
67 was a very dramatic period. So it was a war, but it ended up very, very fast. We call it in Israel the 6-day war.
6-day war, yep.
And so that was kind of the first. There was another conflict in '56, but I was way too young, so I don't have memories of that. What happened?
The Suez Crisis versus Egypt.
This is the Suez Crisis. This is 1956, and I was very young, so I don't have memories of that. But '67 was a big deal, and a few years later was another major conflict, which was the '73 war. So two major conflicts. '67, I was still a teenager. '73, I was already at that point. So the way Israel has something which is similar to the ROTC.
Okay, I see.
Which is where somehow you combine military service with academic study. Yeah. So the normal trajectory in Israel is you finish high school at age 18, you go and you serve in the military for 3 years, and then you go to college.
Right.
But you can ask to start your academic studies. So in this case, it was interleaving of academia and military service.
I see. So you were already in the bachelor's program by then, by '73?
So I remember I went 1 year to rabbinical seminary.
Correct, yes.
And then at age 17, I started the bachelor degree. Okay. Then in the next summer, I had to do boot camp.
I see.
And then I go to another year of college. And then in the second summer, I also do military training. And then the 73 war started.
Right.
And I had to go, and I was called to serve during the war.
So you were on the front lines.
I was in active duty in the war of '73. After I finished the war, I finished college. I went to graduate school, did my master and PhD in Israel, went to the United States, came back to visit, and there was another war. It was the '82 war. So you sum up all this time, all together, I spent about 5 years in the military.
I see. So you served in the '82 war as well?
Yeah.
So I presume you saw action on the front lines?
I saw action on the front line in '82, yes.
'82. Yeah. How was that like? I mean, you're a scientist and engineer by profession, and you're out there holding weapons. And
you have to compartmentalize. You put your science and engineering on the side, and you just do your military thing.
And I'm sure there were other Army personnel too who had essentially come away from their regular lives as, and other professions were serving in the military.
So Israel, the way it works in Israel, you have many people who are reservists. So especially for men, you do your military duty, let's say 18 to 21, you do 3 years.
Yeah.
And then you stay usually about your mid-40s and you serve in the reserve. And it's about 1 month a year. It's a significant amount of service. It's about 1 month a year.
Yeah.
So the way the IDF works is you have what we call the regular army. And the army there does not mean like here. Here you have army and navy and air force. Army means the military, the whole thing. But you have people who are on either regular, so either they are draftees who do the 3 years of service, or the people who sign up for more, so they're volunteer, they stay for more,
right? Or
they are reservists, and the bulk of the IDF are reservists. So these are really, especially all men in Israel, all men up to a certain age, are still in service. So this unit was a unit of all the reservists. I was still unique that I flew from the United States, and within about 48 hours I was in Lebanon. It was a very abrupt transition from Palo Alto to Lebanon.
This is in 1982, right?
Yeah.
So returning to your timeline, in 1974, you got your BSc, but I want to rewind a little bit before that to when you're finishing your high school, and then you do this 1 year of rabbinical study, and then you're considering going to university. Was the entrance to universities competitive? How did you apply, and how was the admission process?
So I don't think I knew much about how things work at the time, but I had a good enough grades from high school that my admission was, I was just admitted. Today I know much more about university admission. Mm-hmm. At the time, all I knew I applied, but I had a very strong report card.
Right.
So in Israel also there is something called matriculation exam, which are final exams in high school.
Right. Yeah.
And again, I had overall very good grades, so there's no question that I will be shooing for admission.
So you didn't have to write a separate entrance exam for the university. It was just the matriculation grades.
No, just based on my high school record.
Okay.
As far as I recall, I don't think there was any exam or anything like that yet.
And so when you start your BSc, your first love and your first interest is physics. And
No. So there is a twist there. Twist there. When I'm about age 16, I suddenly see an advertisement in the newspaper.
You're still in high school at this point, right?
I'm just finishing high school. I'm just about to finish high school.
Yeah.
And I see an advertisement in the paper. Tel Aviv University is going to have a 2-week intensive course in computer programming. And I knew nothing about computers. Mm-hmm. This is the age where there were computers.
Yeah.
Computers were all what we call the mainframe. They were in a glass house.
Yeah.
They were in the back, banks, bigger, who used computers at the time? Banks, insurance companies, maybe the government. But you never saw computers, okay?
Right.
And I had little idea about this. But somehow this intrigued me. And I don't know why. Now it's very hard for me to go back now. We just, where we eat, we basically interact with the computer almost every minute of our lives.
Right.
There was just no computers. And something about this intrigued me, and I don't know why. Mm-hmm. And I asked my father, they had some nominal tuition. I have no idea how much it was, because the currency has changed God knows how many times since then. But I asked my father, would he give me the money for I can go to this course? And he said, sure. So I went to 2-week, very intensive course in programming. It was Fortran. Mm-hmm. It was in Tel Aviv University. I stayed with relatives in Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with programming there. And I did go after that to the academic bookstore. Mm-hmm. And found a manual of Algol W. Mm-hmm. And I knew Algol W back and forth without ever writing. I never wrote a program in Algol W. But I read the manual cover to cover, and I mastered Algol W at the time. But I never wrote a single program in Algol W.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was very clear that I want to study computer science. But the field was still academically, it was very, very young. In fact, the Bar-Ilan University did not have a major in computer science. Mm-hmm. They only had a minor in computer science. So I majored in physics and minored in computer science.
And this is very early days of the computational era, late 1960s, early 1970s, like you said.
So I remember where they had a big event that the president of the university came to drink champagne when the mainframe was upgraded into one megabyte.
1 megabyte.
1 megabyte was such a big event that the whole leadership of the university came to celebrate. They've reached this milestone. That the mainframe now has 1 megabyte of memory.
1 megabyte is unimaginable today.
1 megabyte of memory. And the mainframe had 1 megabyte of memory. And that was an event, not that the sysadmins were celebrating. It was a university, the leadership of the university came to celebrate this 1 megabyte event.
What was the first computer that you used?
I think the first computer I used was the one in Tel Aviv University during this 2-week course. And I think it was CDC, maybe CDC 6000.
Yeah, and this was Fortran programming, right?
Fortran programming on punch cards, just this medieval period in computing.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with punch cards programming.
So I'll jump ahead a little bit to tell you about punch cards.
Yeah.
So remember that after in 1971, I go to do my military service.
Yeah.
And then I go back to let's see, I serve. When do I go back to college? I go back to graduate school in 1976.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and to do a master's degree in computer science.
Right.
And we had a project to do. So I go to look for what I was familiar with, a key punch machine. First of all, I wrote my program on whoever writes today a program on a sheet of paper. First of all, you write your program,
right,
and then you go to key punch it. And I said, where are the key? And then finally, in a dark, a dead-end hallway, dark hallway, I found a dusty key punch machine. I said, okay, I found one, and I sit down and I start punching the cards. And somebody walks by and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm punching the cards for my project." And he says, "Punch card? Nobody uses punch cards anymore." So I said, "How do you enter your job?" "You use a terminal." "Really? What is a terminal?" So this gap that I had between when I took the first programming course, which was 1970, and just a few years later, the world has changed. The microcomputer was introduced.
Yeah.
NP completers was introduced. So big theoretical revolution and big practical revolution. So I did not yet see a microprocessors at all, but there were terminals. Now if you wanted to submit a job, you had a terminal, and that's how you submit your job. So I had to learn how to use terminals. So somebody saw me trying to punch cards, and it was as if I doing my project with a hammer and a chisel today. Imagine you see someone using a hammer and a chisel to write a project, to write a writing assignment.
And this happened in just a space of a few years.
Very short. But this year, I think people don't realize the 70s was a big in theory, there was a huge change, the introduction of NP completeness. The paper was 1971. In fact, we just celebrated 50 years to Cook's paper. Yeah. And Gary and Johnson was 1979, kind of became the Bible that we all read. I read it cover to cover when I was I was a PhD student. So huge changes. Microprocessor was invented in the 1970s. So 70s were a big period of big changes. And in the background, we don't know also the internet was developed. Okay, internet was first 1969. So again, the major development of the internet happened also in the 1970s.
When was your first experience with research in computer science?
So my research started. So master was a 2 year. Master was 2 years, and you're supposed to. First year was mostly finding, taking courses and trying to define a research project. And then the second year is you still take courses, but you do your research project, you write a master thesis, and you're done.
Right.
And we had in the spring, that spring, I started in 1976, and then in the spring I take a theory seminar. Mm-hmm. In a theory seminar, we had to read papers and give a presentation. And the paper ends up with some questions. And the question sounded to me very interesting. And I go to the professor. I said, "These are really interesting questions. I'd like to think about it." He said, yeah, I'll be happy to advise you on this question. That's how it started. So the questions were there in the paper, and essentially my master thesis was trying to answer these questions from the paper left open.
So you didn't have much of an experience doing research while you were in the BSc program. It was only after the
nothing.
program.
The BSc was actually, the physics was a very special major. It was such the course requirement was so high that it was considered what they call expanded major.
I see.
So you could basically, you didn't have to take a minor. So essentially I took, it was as if I took a major and 2 minors, because I did also a minor in computer science on top of expanded major. But there was I had no research experience at the time.
And so you started your MS in 76, and you got your MS in 1980. And then just a year after that, and that the MS was in Weizmann Institute of Science.
Yes.
And then a year after that, in 1981, you got your PhD in computer science. Did it really take you just 1 year to do your PhD?
I was in a hurry. So I did my PhD in 1 year.
How did you manage that?
I was already I had a trajectory. I already had some research questions, and I kind of followed up. I had I stole the master's study from reading some paper, coming up with some questions, and I kind of just continue. And I was a bit in a hurry. I said, okay, what needs to be done? I need to write some papers. So I essentially finished the PhD in 1 year.
And you changed universities, right? After your master's to your PhD, you changed universities for just 1 year.
I went from Weizmann to Hebrew University. Yes. Same advisor, the person who advised me he was actually a faculty member at Hebrew University. He was an adjunct at Weizmann, so he advised me at Weizmann, and then he became my primary advisor at the Hebrew University.
So there was a continuity for you.
And essentially, I had like 3 papers. In that year, I wrote 3 papers, and he said, "That's good enough for a PhD. Time for you to go for a postdoc."
So as you're nearing the end of your PhD, did you consider other career options apart from a postdoc? Was there a job market for computer scientists in Israel? How was it?
So at that point, if you wanted to pursue an academic job, it was expected you'll do a postdoc. Israeli kind of also computer science in Israel was very young in those days.
Correct. Yeah.
It was very young. It was very much at the beginning of computer science. And in fact, after my master's, before I did my PhD, I tried to apply to the United States to do a PhD in the United States. But I was all away from the university because I was in the military. And it means I did not have any guidance from faculty member. Where do I do this? How do I do this? I looked at GRE, and the GRE has the verbal part.
Yeah.
And if you're not a native speaker, you're not doing well on the verbal part at all.
Right.
And so today, when we actually look at graduate applicants for international students, we look essentially mostly at the quantitative score.
Right.
And the verbal score, I pay attention to verbal score for domestic students because it tells me how well they're going to do writing.
Right.
But international students, I ignore it because I know it plays no role. But I did not know that. Nobody told me that.
Right.
So I did a mock exam. I did not do well. I said, okay, I'm not going to do I skipped the GRE. And that really, I botched the whole application process. And eventually I was admitted by very few places, and I admitted at one good place, which is University of Pennsylvania, but with no stipend. And so there was no chance of me going. Right. And I remember the years later, it was the letter of admission was, I think, by Arvind Joshi. And years later, I gave a distinguished lecture at Penn, and I reminded him, of course, he didn't remember me for months. He wrote a letter. He had no memory. Yeah. But so I tried to study United States. It didn't work out. but it worked out that I could stay in Israel.
Yeah.
A few years later, Israelis did not. Today, you see very few Israelis in the United States coming for the PhD.
Yeah.
Because they have, they have they have Turing Award winners in Israel.
Right.
They don't need to come to Illinois when they can go to study at Hebrew University and Weizmann Institute and places like that.
Right.
You'll find maybe some people want to study maybe MIT, Stanford, CMU, but it used to be that the most standard thing was if you want an academic career, you have to study abroad. And that's not the case today. Even I think the postdoc requirement is now today. People don't always feel they must do a postdoc abroad. But at the time, the country was so small, computer science was so small, that it was expected for you to do. So I really went to do a postdoc with a full expectation of coming back to study, to work in academia in Israel.
Since you mentioned language, your schooling, your high schooling, middle schooling, and then also your bachelor's was what language? What languages did you use? Spoken language.
Oh, it's all Hebrew.
It's all Hebrew.
It's all Hebrew.
At what point? And I presume you learned English on the side too as a second language.
So Israel English is taught as a second language, starting from I think like maybe 5th grade. So it's very important. And English is a primary foreign language that people in Israel study. So most Israelis speak the semi-decent English. Okay, even they always said some English. I mean, after that, today also the people later watch movies and TV, so there are other ways to study English. But at the time, that's where you studied English. In fact, even though it's not English, but I learned to read the Roman alphabet before I learned to read the Hebrew alphabet. Because we had an atlas. I don't know in what language it was, but it was written in Roman letters. I wanted to know, what is this country? What is this country? And I asked my mother to tell me the letters. So I learned to read actually the Roman alphabet before the Hebrew alphabet.
When you think research or when you think of research ideas, do you think in Hebrew or do you think in English? No.
Probably mixed. I know when I say it's always, even in my thought, it's in English. It's mixed. I don't even know. I'm kind of fully bilingual.
Yeah.
Partly because.
How long did that transition to using English take? Was it like gradual after you came to the U.S. for your postdoc?
You come to the United States, it's an immersion. First of all, you spend most of your day around other people who, even though Stanford, when I was a postdoc, it was very international, of course.
Right.
But English is the lingua franca. Everybody speaks English. That's your common language. So you basically start when you use a language, at all times. And then you write papers. Of course, you write them in English from the very beginning. My master thesis was written in English. My PhD had to be in Hebrew because they say it's a Hebrew university. Your dissertation has to be. My master thesis was in English, but my doctoral dissertation was in Hebrew. But I have not really written much Hebrew since then. So I'm not very smooth today. I was writing Hebrew actually.
You're listening to the interview with Moshe Vardi, Professor of Computer Science at Rice University. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. So in 81, you finished your PhD and then you immigrated to the U.S.
To the U.S. I went to do a postdoc in the United States.
To do a postdoc at Stanford. I mean, by this time you were you already independent, living by your own, even while you're doing your master's and PhD, so that was not an issue for you?
So I was doing a postdoc. I lived by myself. Then I started getting a job. I worked at IBM. I did meet my future wife in Palo Alto, and it was all again at home. We spoke English. She speaks a little Hebrew, but not enough for normal conversation. So that's gradually it became more and more English.
I see. But culturally, were there any changes? Were there any dramatic things that you had to adapt to after you moved to the US in 81? Or was it fairly smooth and you really didn't have to think about it much?
You always have to kind of to adapt, and there is a kind of cultural gap between Israelis and Americans. So Israelis tend to be very direct. So the Israeli are called, there is a term which we use called sabra, and it refers to the fruit of what we call it's a cactus with fruits, cactus pear. I think it's called cactus pear, and it's a fruit but very thorny. So the parable is that Israeli are sweet on the inside and thorny on the outside. So Israel tend to be much more direct. I mean, United States, the culture is, there is especially there is a, I would say, the Protestant culture.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all very indirect, and then Israelis come and they are direct, okay. And here at the university, I call things the way I see them, and very often the higher administration is not always happy with my direct criticism.
Do you find yourself interacting nowadays? Do you find yourself interacting differently with your relatives and friends who are Israeli or Jewish versus your other professional colleagues who are not?
So after you do learn to kind of to adapt, you do learn that I had to develop a bit more diplomatic skills appropriate for this culture. In fact, I had the Israeli postdoc, and he complained at some point that I was not direct enough. He said, you just have to tell me things the way they are. You have been too diplomatic with me. And so I said, well, maybe I've become more diplomatic than I realized. But again, if you ask people, usually they would mention, at Rice, we don't have many Israelis at Rice. So they will mention my directness, I think. But I think it has been moderated after many years of living in the United States.
Yeah. So returning to your timeline, so 1983, you finished your postdoc, and then after that, you spent a couple of years as a visiting scientist at IBM Research and also research associate at Stanford. And then in 1985, you officially joined IBM Research at Almaden. So around the time you're finishing your postdoc, did you consider returning to Israel?
Oh yeah, I was already. I had an offer. I was all ready to go back. But I did have a relationship, and I had to make a kind of one of this life decision, okay. And I did talk to my partner, and we decided, does it make sense to bring her to Israel? And eventually I decided it wasn't fair to ask her to. I was already living there, and it wasn't fair to ask her to uproot her life, so it didn't make sense. So I made a decision, what was at the time one of the most difficult decisions for me ever, was to stay in the United States.
Stay in the U.S. And did you consider academic jobs and industry jobs at that time?
So really, I applied for one place. I just applied to IBM. I mean, I had good relationships there. I mean, my postdoc there was very successful. I had good collaborations there. We started collaborating with people. So I did not go on a big job search. Okay, so I did. I mean, there was actually another. There were kind of two places I consider. Again, I want to stay in the Bay Area. So I had another offer from UC Santa Cruz, but eventually I decided to go to IBM.
Because you already had connections with them and you already had collaborations.
Yeah, I had connections there, and I decided to go and work for IBM. And at the time, this was what we call the good old times of industrial research. And so the best time to work for a company is when it's a monopoly. When a company is a monopoly, they have money, and the cost of doing research, they simply pass it to the consumer, right? So it was regulated, but basically they could justify doing research. So at that time, working for IBM Research, and the same Bell Lab was kind of very similar. This was a fantastic place to do research. It was kind of what we call unfettered research. Just do good research, publish in good places, show that you're doing great research, and that would have been good enough. Okay, nobody asked what does he do for the company. the question. If you could do research that would be excellent, they would be very happy with you. So most of my time at IBM was a great research environment. And then the business went down, and we discovered that we actually joke. We call ourselves IBM University.
Mm-hmm.
We say it's just like a university, except for two things: we don't have to teach,
right,
and we don't have to write research proposals. Other than that, it was just like a university. So it was really today people just dream. Maybe there are a few places like that today. I mean, very often the research is industrial research is tend to be much more applied these days. Okay, what are you doing for the company? But maybe Microsoft Research still have some of this old kind of style. Do good research, and we'll figure out later what to do with it.
I think those early days are no longer here. I think where you could do blue sky research without having much of a connection to the company goals or the shareholders, interests and things like that. So you could set your own research agenda in those days of IBM Research.
So the motto of IBM Research at the time was IBM Research division had to be famous for its science and vital to IBM for its technology. So there were people there who were doing, like relational databases were developed at IBM. Okay. The disk drive was developed at IBM. So there were lots of good ideas. But they basically said, if we just bring smart people here and let them do whatever they think, good thing will come out of it.
Right.
And so we did things that are just great research, no obvious benefit to the company. They were happy with it for a while. Yeah.
And so what was this changing role of IBM Research inside IBM as that changed? Did that cause you to think, okay, perhaps this is not the right place for me, perhaps I should be in academia, or were there other reasons? So because you were there at IBM from 84 to 93, that's almost a decade, and you even became a higher level manager.
Close to a decade. And the early part of the decade was just do good science. And then the environment changed. And when did it start? Around, I think IBM started losing money around 92. And suddenly the mission changed. What are you doing for IBM? What are you doing for the technology of the company? And that was kind of a very, very abrupt change. IBM went through a huge change. I mean, IBM at the time was over 400,000 employees, and IBM had to reduce its size by about 150,000 employees. It was a very dramatic change in IBM, and ultimately that was the time I said, okay, it's time to go to academia.
But then, of course, you moved from the Bay Area in California, Northern California, to Houston, which is in Texas. Was that geographical change something that you were okay with, that you had planned for?
92 was a recession. It was a post-Cold War recession. The Cold War has ended. There was major cuts in defense spending, and so people now forget this was the election that George Bush lost.
Correct. Bill Clinton got elected, yes.
And Clinton got elected. And the major reason was because the business has changed. Okay? So there was a deep recession, which Bush did not quite, there was a famous, Bush didn't quite realize what was going on. Right. Clinton came up, is the economy stupid? Is the economy stupid?
Yes.
So the academic job market was very tight. So this was a difficult time to look for. I remember I looked for many, many places, and I end up, and I was coming already at the level at that point. I've been out enough years, so I went out as a full professor. Full professor is a different hiring game. It's more difficult to be hired as a full professor with tenure. So I did not get many offers. And I decided to take, my son was already a student at Rice.
I see.
and I decided Rice made me an offer. They needed a department chair. That's why they wanted me. They needed a department chair. I said, okay,
Right.
here I come.
Right. So that segues nicely into our the last segment of the interview, which is retrospective and perspective. And the first question I want to ask there is: so you've spent almost a decade in industry in a research lab, and then at this point, almost 3 decades in a university. Many of our listeners think about industry versus academia versus research lab as they consider career options at different stages of their career. Can you talk a little bit about the good things about working in a research lab that you experienced and the good things that you experience in academia, things that often people don't think about when they think about these careers?
So again, when I was in industry, it was a different era. And I think today, I think the tension is much harder in a way that we did not feel that way. So what do I mean by that? So you are working for a company. Whom are you really working for? So today is, what are you doing that would help the company? It's kind of business. It was business driven. Okay. While if I work for academia, I'm working for so to speak, for the public good. I do my research and I contribute to the public. When we worked at IBM, everything that we did was kind of open science, or we had patents. I mean, there was sometimes you had something useful, you could apply for a patent, but most of the research was go ahead and publish it in a good conference, in a good journal. Okay, so you didn't feel there was a tension. Whom am I working for? Today, I think people need to ask themselves, whom are you working for? And if you're working in academia, whom are you working for? The answer is, I don't work for the university president. Ultimately, my research is supposed to benefit the world, the public good. On the other hand, suppose today you are going to work for Google, or even let's take a stronger example. You're going to work for Facebook. Whom are you, who benefits? What is it? There is a phrase, cua bene, who benefits? If you go to work for Facebook, for the benefit of whom are you working? Right. And people have to admit, well, I'm working for Facebook. Okay. Well, so now it becomes a much deeper question. Well, you work for Facebook. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah. Okay. I mean, suppose you are an engineer that, let's take an extreme example. Okay. You're designing cigarettes for a tobacco company. Okay. Clearly, you're working in the public interest. Right. After all, we all know what smoking is about. So you're working there. You're just trying to make money for yourself. You're trying to get a salary, and you're working for the company. Okay. And now you have to think yourself: am I comfortable looking at myself in the mirror every day, knowing that I work for a tobacco company? So I had an interesting conversation some years ago from I met someone who is at mid-40s, and he tells me I'm retired. Mm-hmm. And I was probably mid-50s at that point. And I said, you look mid-40s? He said, yeah, I'm 45. How can you afford to retire? He said, well, I worked for 10 years for a hedge fund, and I just have enough money to live till old age. I made enough money there. Yeah. He said, but typically when people make the first $1 million, they want to have 2 million. When they make the first 2 million, they want 4 million. When they have 4 million, they want 8 million. What made you stop? And he said, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, the business is completely legal. But the reality is that we have found, he said, you need to think of the economy as a river. And the river is a bit frothing, and there is a foam on top of it. And we figure out how to get a ladle and collect the foam. Mm-hmm. And nobody notices because it's just foam. But ultimately, it's a lot of money that we are collecting. And he said it's an invisible tax on the economy. I said, don't you believe in all the story about liquidity and everything? He said, yeah, these are good stories. He just could not live himself anymore.
Yeah.
So this point, I think, people that, the same thing, we need to think, if you are working for a tobacco company, you need to ask yourself, okay, and many people I would say, okay, there are people who work there on the line, they need to make a living.
Right.
But I say, if people who are playing a more important role in these companies, I think they have to be morally obtuse. Yes, they tell themselves stories. We do something, we sell products people want to buy. But of course, you're trying to get them addicted to selling cigarettes, okay? Okay. For example, let's say when they advertise cigarettes on TV, they have to have a warning.
Right.
And the warning is always in the bottom, it's very difficult to read it.
Right. Yeah.
So I think you have to be morally obtuse to work for a tobacco company.
Yeah.
And I think today for some computer companies, I think it requires moral obtuseness to work for these companies. So I think today the tension, between working for academia and working for industry and depend which industry and what are you going to do for this industry.
Right.
I think it's much better, and I think this is a conversation that we in computer science have yet to have with ourselves.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
If one of my students, I'll tell you a concrete example. One of my students, we talked about when he finished his PhD. I said, let's talk about your career plans. He said, no, I think academia is too hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to work for industry. Okay, what industry? You tell me. I'm thinking of going to work for Wall Street, as a quant.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So I tell him the story about the guy who retired at age 45 because he couldn't look himself in the mirror anymore. I said, I'm just telling you the story. You decide what you want to do.
Right.
So where is the student today? Facebook. And I think to myself, gee, I should have let him go to Wall Street. That might have been a better.
Yeah, he would have earned. Perhaps he would have earned more money. Well, I mean, they earned quite a bit of money at Facebook too.
He probably would have also earned more money at Wall Street, and maybe ethically it's less questionable.
Yeah.
So we had been considering, and I think for many years it was a value. We considered. I would tell students because I spent some of my time in industry and some in academia. Students come and ask me about the pros and cons.
Right.
And I tell them, I can tell you which one is better. I can just tell you the plus and minuses of each one.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I've been taking so far like a neutral, morally neutral tone. But I have to admit it. I find it more and more difficult to do this as our industry is becoming clear what the adverse societal role that it is playing.
Right.
A friend of mine put it in a phrase that I translated it very nicely. Let's use the Star Wars metaphor. We think of ourselves still as the rebels. We don't realize now we are the empire. Okay, we are running the Black Star. We are not the rebels anymore. We are the empire. Okay, and so at what point do we talk to our students as well? Yes, you can go to companies, but if you're going to work for a company, you are working for the benefit of that company. When I work in academia, yes, when I work for university, yes, I have an educational mission.
Right.
But I don't feel I'm working for the president.
Right.
I told the president once that he's working for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I told our president that he's overhead. He looked a bit nonplussed. I said, look, what is the real mission of the university? Teaching, learning, teaching, and research. This is the mission of the university. That means everybody else, like I was a department chair, I said, that's overhead.
Right.
And I got this lesson actually when I was at IBM. I became department manager. So this is a second line manager. And for the first time, I sat with our admin and I saw a budget. And my salary was fully in the overhead column. Mm-hmm. And I took offense. What do you mean? I'm still active in research. I say, it doesn't matter. It's not a budget. Don't take it personally. Here's how we look at it. If you're a researcher, you're doing research full time. If you are a first line manager, you're 80% doing research and 20% you're overhead. If you're a second line manager and above, you're fully overhead. Your job is to enable other people to do research. Mm-hmm. Whether you personally do research or not, it doesn't matter. And I said, oh, it's actually very important to remember there is what the research organization is supposed to do research. That means that the lab director on one hand and the janitor on the other hand, they're both overhead. Right. Now, of course, one is paid much more than the other, but right. The real work is doing research because it's IBM Research.
Right.
The real work in the university is teaching and learning. And so, in fact, I have no doubt when they do the calculation of overhead, what do they put the president's salary? Overhead.
Right.
It's all administrative overhead.
Yeah.
So I told him that he was not happy when I told him he works for me rather than the other way around. But my view is universities, even private universities, they're private. It's a corporate status, okay. But our mission is the public good. Our commitment should be to the public good. We should do research education for the public good.
Yeah.
You're in a company, you're there. Now we know companies are run for the profit motive. I mean, Facebook has proven that when it was about society versus profit, they always went for profit. Okay? And so if you're going to work for this company, you have to ask yourself, okay, what business are they in? Do I like that business? Do I like working for this company? And this is a conversation so far we have not really had in computer science. Okay? Because of view of ourselves as we are the rebels. Now that we should accept we are the empire, you have to ask yourself, what branch of the empire am I working on for?
Yeah, and I think making that conversation harder is also the fact that many computer scientists work at a layer that is kind of removed from the users. You know, someone working on infrastructure, they don't really get to see the user. They're enabling others. You know, using your cigarette metaphor, they might be building parts for a machine that is going to be used to build cigarettes. And the work they're doing is very interesting, and they never get to think of the users. I think that makes the conversation very, very hard.
Yeah, but I think it's time for us to have this conversation. Admit, I have not had such conversation with my students.
Yeah.
Partly because I didn't really want to be. I mean, they're grown up. They need to have their own make their own moral judgments. But at least the choices need to be clear, and I think we've been avoiding. I mean, It's not just where the students go. You know, I mean, we need to start struggling. Is it ethical to take money from Facebook? You know, part of the thing these companies do, they have enough money to buy our goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Google is paying for the Turing Award.
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, ACM does not want to give it up. It's $1 million a year. It's real money.
Right.
I mean, it's very, it's very easy to be ethical when it costs you little. When the cost is very low. Sure, I'll do the ethical thing.
Right.
What happens when doing the ethical thing is expensive, costs you a lot of money? Well, then it's much more harder to be ethical. Okay. Right. And I remember once talking to someone. I said, if you find a wallet with money and address, do you return the money? And somebody says, well, up to $1,000, sure, but above it, I don't know. Okay. And so we have yet to seriously acknowledge the role that we're playing now in society, and what does it mean, and how do we react to that? That to me is a difficult conversation that it's just beginning. We are at the very beginning of this, admitting our role in society.
So beautifully put. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast interview with Moshe Vardi, Professor of Computer Science at Rice University. Moving on to a slightly different perspective question. So you've had a lot of successes in your life, but I'm sure you've had a lot of failures and a lot of rejections as well. Do you have a philosophy in dealing with failures and rejections? How do you advise others deal with failures and rejections?
I tell people that after, last year I celebrated my 40th year since my PhD, and 2 years before that I realized it was the 40th anniversary of my first paper. First paper was 1979 was my first paper, and I still get papers rejected. and I still get proposals rejected, and I still don't like it. It's not as if to say, oh, well, okay, So, of course, we all have our defenses. The reviewers are stupid, we say. Of course, I tell people, you want to see what the reviewers look like? Go look in the mirror. That's what the reviewers look like. It's not as if we have authors from Earth and reviewers from Mars, okay?
Yeah.
We are the author, we are the reviewer. We're reviewing each other's work. So
Yeah.
I can tell you that I've had students who told me that they don't want to go to academia because they said, I look at you and you are fairly well known and have a fairly strong reputation, and you still have papers rejected and you still have proposal rejected. I don't know that I can stomach it. And I tell people, you just have to have thick skin, and you say, okay, I didn't do well with this paper. Don't blame the reviewers. Yeah. Always ask, how can I do better? I tell people, it's easy to blame the reviewers, but then that would not lead to better work.
Right.
So if the reviewer, people complain, oh, the reviewer didn't really understand the paper. I said, well, then you need to explain it better, because you wrote it. So you don't blame the reviewers.
Right. Right.
So unless you have a thick skin, you cannot be in academia. Academia is a very competitive business.
My next question is a little bit hypothetical, but I'll ask it anyway. So you grew up in Israel, and then you did your bachelor's, master's, and PhD there, and then eventually you moved here to the U.S. and you stayed here. If in a parallel world you had been born in the U.S. and you had gone through the U.S. educational system, all else being equal, you're the same person, you have the same kind of family. Do you feel like your career and your life may have been different? And again, this is a hypothetical question.
It's kind of not completely hypothetical in the following sense that both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. Mm. They met in what's called a DP camp in Germany. DP stands for Displaced Persons Camp. The Allies. There were so many people who were displaced in the war. The Allies created the places where these people can come and settle down and then figure out where are they going to go from here. Mm. So my parents met in a displaced persons camp. And my father wanted to go to America. America was to be the golden state, the golden country. You go there and life is good. Israel was no Israel yet, and there was fairly clear it's going to be a war.
Yeah.
And in fact, my mother had a brother, and he lost his wife and daughter in the Holocaust. And he said, I cannot stomach another war. And he came to the United States. Mm. And my mother said to my father, we're going to go to Israel, to Palestine. And they went to Palestine and had to fight a war. They came to Israel. My mother in late 47, my father in early 48. Mm. And there was a war. They had to fight in what we call the 48 war. We call it the War of Independence. Okay. But I could not so far to imagine a scenario where they decide to go to America. Okay. Right. And then I'm born in America. I think growing up in Israel probably gave me, there is a phrase, tough time make strong men, strong people. Strong people create successful times. Successful time create weak people. Weak people create hard times. Okay?
It's a full cycle.
It's a cycle. So growing up in Israel, as I said, having to, as a child, dealing with terrorism, like from age 12, the realization that there's some people who want to kill me. Yeah. And this, you can think what you want about the conflict and what to do about it. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It is someone traumatizing. And I'm sure it is also traumatizing to Palestinian children. I'm not trying to take any of this away. Okay. Yeah. But going like that, serving in the military, where you learn both discipline and responsibility and also leadership. It's hard for me to separate who I am I mean, yes, of course there is. We all know about this nature versus nurture, but the answer it is both. Yes, I come to the world with a certain genetic imprint, and this genetic imprint is just potential to do certain things. Will you do these things or not?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so it's very hard
Yeah.
to say what I would be like. I mean, here, for example, especially in academia, I have leveraged my academic freedom and tenure, and I had very open disagreements with the administration here,
Yeah.
and I did not shy from such very open disagreements. I have tenure, but again, I mean, it's just not, I know other people with tenure that wouldn't do that.
I see.
So I can't tell you exactly, but I said, this is, people tried to kill me before, so this is not so bad. They're not going to kill me. They're upset at me. They're not going to kill me.
Yeah.
I won't get a raise. It's not so bad as being killed. So you cannot separate. You grow up in Israel, and it shapes me as I am. Okay.
That's an interesting perspective. But,
Yeah.
so you mentioned your parents met in a displaced persons camp. Where did your parents grow up, each of them?
So both of my parents are from Central Europe,
Mm.
from kind of remnants of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Mm.
So my mother grew up in Hungary, and she was involved in what's called the Hungarian Holocaust, which is at the end of the last half of 44. There is a Holocaust in Hungary. It happens very late,
Yeah.
in the late part of 44,
Yeah.
and she lost all of her family except one brother that survived.
Mm.
My father was born in Romania, in Transylvania.
Mhm.
Now, Transylvania was an area of because remember, we have the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then it splits.
Yeah. Yes.
So Hungary was thought that some pieces that went to other countries belonged to them.
Right.
So when Hungary joins the Axis, they get half of Transylvania,
Mm.
including the half that where my father lives. So both of my parents survived what's so-called the Hungarian Holocaust.
Yeah. I have two more questions for you to end our interview. My penultimate question is about diversity in computer science. To this day, the fraction of women and underrepresented minorities that we have in computer science, definitely in research, but also in industry and in academia, is still on the lower side. We are certainly not at parity. I want to hear ideas and thoughts and things that you have done, or just ideas that you have for ways we can improve it as a community. It's a very open question.
I think the issue with women and other minorities are somewhat different. Because with other minorities, it also had to do with socioeconomic background, and there is a way in the United States that the socioeconomic background is kind of perpetuates itself with the way we fund school by property taxes. That means the poor area has less money. They have less money. They have poorer education, and so it kind of self-perpetuates. Okay,
Yeah.
and so it's a struggle, and to improve there, you really have to. Yes, you should reach out and find deserving candidates, but the college level, unless we spend time making sure that they get good education before that, it's very hard for them to go to universities and do that. That not saying that not can be done. I mean, very often I have a colleague at Richard Tapia,
Mm-hmm.
who has been a role model. He's shown what you can take. You take people who went to. His focus has always been on the graduate degree. Take students who already went to college, but are not thinking of going to graduate school because it's just not in their family tradition. That it's not something they think. And so if you convince them, you should consider graduate school, and you mentor them, and they are the one who may be suffering from the imposter syndrome, and you have to tell them, no, you can do that. So you can do a lot. Women, it's a more difficult story. I mean, there is an organization called NC WIT.
Yeah.
and
National
National Center for Women in Information Technology.
Correct.
And when they launched, they said, okay, we're going to fix the problem in 10 years or something like that. And they, of course, they have never fixed the problem. So we at RISE have succeeded at raising the level of the participation of women in the undergraduate degree from about 15% to 30%. So we doubled it. Of course, we would like to be at parity, but there is a lot you can do that you can do to do it. For example, especially men underestimate what is it like to sit in a room and to have the majority of people be of different gender.
Right.
So once I had a little experience like that. I had some meeting that met just next to the Hopper conference. This was in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, Grace Hopper conference, yes.
The Grace Hopper conference, and we coordinated, and they invited us to come to the banquet. Okay, so we have one table of men in a large hall,
right,
banquet hall, full of women.
Yeah.
And first I remember the feeling, oh my goodness, look at us, we're a minority here. The other thing that I saw is how women behave where the default is there are women around. And I realized that when they are in a mixed environment, we're in a minority, they almost they try to act like men. I don't even know that they're aware of it. But they were behaving like themselves. For example, they received such awards, and the recipient was so excited by getting the award, she hopped on the stage. I would never hop on a stage. I'm not saying it's good or bad. To me, it's just not me. No. I would be very serious. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm honored. I will never say, oh, you're and I jump on the stage. It's just not me. There's nothing wrong, bad, or right or wrong about it. But she behaved naturally. She was very excited about the recognition. And I realized that, women, when it comes to computer science, from the very first course, they're a minority. And it comes in the message, this is not the right place for you. So that's partly what can make you feel the imposter syndrome. What am I doing here? Right. In fact, I now remember, it just came to my mind. When I went to graduate school for master's degree at the Weizmann Institute, just a week before that, I had an oral surgery. And there was some complication. And my cheek was swollen like this. And I go to my first lecture, and I don't know anyone. And I'm very self-conscious because of my cheek, which is like this. Yeah. And everybody in the room is female except for me. And remember, I was out of the academic context for a few years because I was in the military. Yeah. And I remember thinking, what am I doing here? How come everybody is women? Maybe computer science is like nursing. Only women go to study this. What is it? What is going on? I had a few minutes of just asking myself. Turn out that it was 8 o'clock in the morning. Most of the men were just, they came in 8:05, 8:10, 8:15. They were just late to the class, okay? Yeah. And ultimately, there was majority of women there, majority of men. But for the first few minutes, I was the only man in the classroom. And I felt incredibly self-conscious. What am I doing here? Maybe I'm in the wrong place. And many of our women, that's how they feel. They come to a classroom and they are a big minority. You look at a typical computer science conference. If you have 10%, it's pretty good.
Right. And also in the early days of computer science, and certainly in the 1970s and 80s, there were a lot more women in computing itself. Did you see that in Israel in your universities?
So Israel had more. In fact, there is an interesting north-south dichotomy, which is the southern countries, at least in Europe. Okay, I don't know about other countries. It would be interesting to look at like India and other countries to see what's happening. But people tell me that if you go to southern Mediterranean countries, it will be Turkey, Greece, Italy, Spain. You see more women than you see in Scandinavia, for example, in Germany. And you ask yourself, why is it? Now, the funny thing is, of course, we think of the northern country as more, women have more rights and less oppression, less sexism than you have in a small company. And there are various theories. I'm not an expert on this. Yeah. But one theory is that women are good at more things than men are good at. They have more choices. Okay, we are nerds. What can we do other than computer science or physics? Okay, so that's what we end up doing. Women have more choices. But it's an interesting issue. What we have found that at RISE that we can do, I said we haven't been able to reach parity, but we form like a women club in computer science where we told men you can join, but it's mostly women. It's create a safe place for them.
Right.
And it is led by a female faculty member, so we try to create a safe place where they don't feel they're in the majority, they don't feel a minority. Trying to get them again to we changed our entry course, the first course. So it used to be, let's start sorting. You have a list, sort a list, okay?
Right.
There are now that, again, I don't know to make general statement, but very often women find that computing in context is more appealing. What is it good for? What does it good for? What good does it do? Sorting a list. And so we changed the first course, instead of just let's do programming, it is really computers can be used to solve interesting problems. So we start with interesting problems. For example, we had the I don't know if you should use the problem, but I love that problem. We had the email corpus from Enron, from the Enron bankruptcy. And you can create a graph. Who sends email to whom? And now you can analyze this graph and find out who is the decision maker.
Right.
By looking at the page rank of that graph. Okay?
Right.
And so you start with an interesting problem, you talk about the mathematics, and then you talk about the algorithms, and then you implement it, okay? So it is not, here is the syntax of programming language, here is what you do. It's much more computing in what people call contextual computing. And so we didn't find one killer measure. Everybody would like to have one switch that if you just flip the switch, suddenly all the women will come. We found many switches, and I think it's an ongoing thing of trial and error to find. And I know for years I was wrong because I kept thinking, okay, what is the barrier here? Let's remove the barriers. That was the wrong way to think about it. It's how do we make this major more attractive to women? What is what is that you can do to make it more attractive? And I said this is for us to go from 15 to 30 was
that's a big jump. Yeah.
To go, I think you go to countries like Israel, it's about 30%, so it's much better than here. But I don't know of any place where there is really parity. And there are complex societal reasons, and we have not fully cracked that particular nut.
Right. Last question, very open-ended. Is there anything else that we didn't cover or touch on that you wanted to talk about?
So, I mean, kind of the interesting for me is in terms of my career is that I started as just what people call pointy head nerd. Okay, just doing. I love the research and the algorithm and the mathematics. And nobody thought while I was getting educated, and even while I was doing the work, nobody thought at all about the societal dimension of our discipline. And we are just now being awakened to this dimension. And for me, this awakening is just something that happened, I'm trying to think, about a decade ago. But the previous decade, I started realizing, gee, this is what is computing, because at that point that somehow the accumulated impact of computing on society became clearer and clearer. And I started thinking, before that I didn't spend a second thinking about it. And it just became very, very clear, and it's become kind of a major issue for me to focus on this. And the metaphor I'd like to use for it is there is a science fiction book from the mid-'80s called Ender's Game.
Yes, also made into a movie now. Yes.
And the spoiler alert, Ender is a boy who and his friend, they think they're playing video games. They don't realize they are fighting an intergalactic war. And when they win the video game, they have really destroyed the civilization. And I think that's what we are right now. We are we are enders. Okay, we have suddenly we have to think about what is the impact of what we are doing. Okay, what is the impact that we are doing? So I think it kind of goes back to academia versus industry.
Yeah.
But what is the role that our discipline plays in society? And we are just now trying to come to terms with the role of computing in society, and what does it mean? What do we do about it?
Yeah.
Something I think it has to become a major issue for our discipline. We have not yet fully accepted that maybe we are the tobacco company, and what does it mean, and what do we do, and how do we change that? And so people talk a lot about, we need to do ethics.
Right.
But I did not see any analysis that if we somehow do more ethics, this will change the situation. Because, again, most people who work for the industry, they are not the people who make the big business model decisions.
Right.
Okay?
Right. Yeah.
So, Facebook can do ethical research, but will that really impact?
Yeah, I guess that's a call for the community to talk more broadly about the ethical aspects of the research that is being done in industry. I guess the question I have is, what kind of forums do you think these conversations should be had in? Certainly, it's very hard to have it in a company like Facebook or in a company like Google, even though their employees sometimes tend to be very, very conscious of and protest against what the company is doing. On the other hand, even in academia, I think, as you mentioned, there are grants out there that you can apply for. Sometimes the grants actually have money from these companies. There have been federal grants by NSF, National Science Foundation, where the co-sponsors are Facebook and Amazon, and sometimes researchers don't want that money. So it's unclear where the forum is where these conversations can be had.
I think it's very difficult for us because, like I said, our mentality is we are the rebels, and we think we are the good guys, and accepting that we may not be the good guys. Yes, of course, computing has benefit, and you can cure cancer with computing, but maybe you're also doing bad things, and having this, being very honest about it, is very, very difficult. Nobody likes to look at the mirror and says, I'm a bad boy. What do I do about this? And I've been part of my activity is not just writing technical papers in conference journal, but trying to influence the community to accept its role and to start having conversation collectively. Okay, what does it mean for us? What are we going to do about it?
Right.
What is the role of computing, and what does it mean for us? We are all members of the computing community, students and faculty and engineers, and you cannot separate it. It's not a nice separation, academic community and industry. We are all in it together. So it's time to have this conversation. It's time to grow up and start to talk about the role that computing plays in society and what's our responsibility, and how we need to accept our responsibility. Yeah. We have yet to fully do that.
Very powerful things for everyone to think about, including our listeners. Thank you, Moshe, for your time and for sharing your journey and your story and your thoughts with us in possibly the only word that I know in Hebrew, Toda Rabba. Thank you.
Okay. Bevakasha.
This was episode 29 of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the immigration story of Moshe Vardi, Professor of Computer Science at Rice University in Houston and winner of the Gödel Prize and the Knuth Prize. If you liked this episode, you may also enjoy the lead episode of this segment of our show on Israel. That's episode 27. And that episode features 3 computer scientists who are originally from Israel and who have been in the US since the 1980s and 1990s. Coming up next week in episode 30 is Regina Barzilai, professor at MIT. She's a double immigrant. First immigrated from Moldova in East Europe to Israel, and then immigrated from Israel to the US. You'll hear both of those immigration stories. You'll also hear next week the story of how Regina beat cancer and how it motivated the latest stage of her research. Stay tuned. That's next week on this podcast. As usual, you can find all episodes and detailed episode guides on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. And you can find us and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and basically wherever you get your podcasts. All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists Podcast.